Hi guys, it's me, CHD, and welcome to yet another episode of the podcast where today we are reviewing the events of yesterday's Spanish Grand Prix, a Grand Prix that for the most part was pretty boring until the final few laps, which were caused by the safety car coming out. It turned into a very dramatic Grand Prix. But we'll go through the events of said Grand Prix in this podcast. Like I said, up until that safety car, nothing really was happening. Especially with the front-running teams. It was all really decided after the first, say, 10 laps or so of that Grand Prix. But the results we ended up with, because of some late drama and controversy, has really been big for the championship, especially the Drivers' Championship, which we will get into those standings in a moment and how they are affected. But yeah, this Grand Prix, we are going to look back at this Grand Prix as a big moment in the Drivers' Championship battle, given how one certain driver lost a lot of points compared to the championship leader. But let's firstly go through the race results of the Spanish Grand Prix. McLaren 1-2 for the third time, I believe, this season. Oscar Piastri taking yet another win, his sixth win of the season. Lando Norris in second, Charles Leclerc third, George Russell fourth, Hülkenberg for Sauber in fifth. That is, honestly, I think one of the best drives he has done in the last, 7 or 8 years that I can think of with Hülkenberg in that car, which, it wasn't the worst car this weekend, but it definitely was not really good enough to be in the points. But he somehow dragged it to fifth place and legitimately overtook Lewis Hamilton on track in the final few laps. An incredible result, which is crucial for Sauber in the championship, which I'll get onto in a moment. Lewis Hamilton sixth. Hamilton had a disaster of a Grand Prix. Isaac Hadjar seventh. Still a good race for him, despite him not being able to keep ahead of Hülkenberg. Pierre Gasly 8th, good race for him. Alonso 9th, thankfully Alonso off the mark in 2025. And Max Verstappen, your world champion, after receiving a 10-second penalty, finishes in 10th. Again, big moment that is for the championship, and this is how the championship standings are affected going forward. Here it is on the driver's side. By the way, I do now know that I'm incorrect with Piastri in terms of how many wins he's had this season. That was his 5th win in Spain, not his 6th for the year. Piastri leading the Drivers' Championship, 10 points clear of Lando Norris. Still close between the McLaren drivers, but Piastri definitely, I think with the way he's driving this year, the clear favourite at this current moment. Norris second, Max Verstappen third, and 49 points he is behind Piastri now. Verstappen is going to have to pull out some incredible results and an incredible run of results if he's going to win this championship at this point. George Russell 4th, Charles Leclerc 5th, Hamilton 6th, Antonelli 7th, Albon 8th, Isaac Hadjar up to 9th, continuing his amazing season, and Esteban Ocon drops down to P10. On the constructors' side, McLaren nearly 200 points clear of the next team, being now Ferrari in second. If only Ferrari's car was much quicker, they would be able to surely get some wins this season, because the driver lineup, being as good as it is the reason they are now second in the championship, despite only having 3 podiums and 0 race wins. They are now 6 points clear of Mercedes, and Red Bull drop to 4th, and Red Bull just over 20 points behind Ferrari, who are now second. Williams then in 5th, and then down from Williams, there's been a lot of change in the constructors' standings. Racing Bulls now up to 6th, 2 points clear of Haas. Sauber, who have been last for the last, year and a half, 2 years in the Constructors' Championship. Sauber are now in 8th place because of that result from Hülkenberg. Level on points with Aston Martin. Sauber only ahead because they've had a better best race result than Aston Martin have had. And Alpine, somehow, despite being competitive in half the Grand Prix so far, are last in the championship. So in the midfield, it is absolutely crazy what is going on there. But the championship, affected quite a bit in certain areas from this Grand Prix. And before we go into the teams, just a quick roundup as usual on the race pace from the Spanish Grand Prix. Now, McLaren were only half a tenth a lap quicker than Red Bull, but that data is a bit skewed because Max did, for most of the race, he was doing much better lap times than the McLarens because Max was on a 3-stop strategy. So that is definitely a big reason why Max was as close to the McLarens on pace over the course of the Grand Prix as he was. McLaren were clearly quicker than Red Bull. I would say by, I think, half a second a lap probably were quicker than Red Bull. Ferrari were about half a second a lap off the pace, at least with Charles Leclerc. Mercedes only slightly slower than Ferrari, but as expected, Mercedes had nowhere near the pace in the race compared to what they had in qualifying. Their race pace really an issue at the moment for the Silver Arrows. And then Racing Bulls, the best of the midfield teams, second and a half off the pace. Same for Sauber, brilliant pace from them, only slightly quicker than Aston Martin. Alpine, 1.8 seconds off, only slightly quicker than Williams. Alpine definitely did not have good pace in the race, and Gasly was a bit lucky to finish in the points because if that safety car didn't come out, Gasly probably would have ended up 13th or something like that. And then Haas, the slowest team, 2 seconds a lap off the pace, and they had a pretty poor weekend in Spain after having a brilliant weekend in Monaco. So that is the race pace data from Spanish Grand Prix. And let's just go straight into the teams and start with McLaren. Thoroughly deserved to get the 1-2, never mind the race win. They were clearly, all weekend, the best team on the grid. They were clearly ahead of Red Bull and Mercedes in qualifying by about a third of a second. And then in the race, like I said, if Max did not do a 3-stop strategy, then I think McLaren were probably about half a second a lap quicker than Red Bull and Ferrari and Mercedes to a degree as well. McLaren were in a class of their own, similar to but not as dominant as what we saw in Miami, but McLaren were way too good in the Spanish Grand Prix. Oscar Piastri, of course, the race winner. You have to give full props to him. The qualifying lap he produced on Saturday, I thought was probably the best pole position he has done so far. It was absolutely superb what he did on that final lap in Q3. And then the race, he got probably the best start I've ever seen from pole position at this track. He had miles behind him in terms of, obviously not literally, but, compared to what we've usually seen at this Grand Prix, he was so comfortable into the braking zone of turn 1 that he could pick any line he wanted, and then he pretty much immediately ran off into the distance. Obviously, Lando being overtook by Verstappen did help him because Lando was held up for a few laps behind Verstappen, who was clearly a lot slower. Piastri then, though, controlled the race, lapped some cars, which at times he did lose a bit of time doing, but then he would quickly respond and put the gap back up to around 4 to 5 seconds. And in the end, Oscar Piastri got the win, thoroughly deserved, and Piastri is in a very good position now. And I think at this point, I've not wanted to say this at all at this during this season, because I've not wanted to put this level of pressure on Piastri, but I think at this point, especially given what happened to Verstappen in the Grand Prix, I think Oscar Piastri now must be the favourite for the World Championship. Whether he wins it, again, we don't know. Lando Norris is still close, only 10 points behind, and we know that Lando, when he's at his best, he can win races himself. Look at what happened in Monaco. But Piastri, consistently, most of the time, is just getting the job done. And that's why Piastri is leading the championship, and that's why he is, I think, my favourite now to win the driver's title. Doesn't mean he will win it. I still think Max Verstappen can win it from third in the championship, even though he's now 49 points behind. But with how good that McLaren is, and how consistent and calm and cool that Oscar is, it's going to be very hard to stop him at this point. And I think the good thing for Oscar is that, beating Lando Norris on a semi-regular basis, I don't think is that difficult for him. And I still think Max Verstappen is probably his biggest challenger in the championship. Piastri at this point, now being 49 points clear, doesn't have to win every Grand Prix. He could go the next 10 races winning maybe one in every 2 to 3 races and still be in a very good position in the championship, as long as he consistently, most of the time, still is beating Lando Norris. So, yeah, Piastri in a great position. I don't think Lando was ever going to win the Grand Prix, even if he had maintained second at the start, but the way he was overtaken by Verstappen into the first corner was a bit disappointing, because he just really let Max go. He didn't really fight it that hard. Maybe that's because he didn't trust himself not to have maybe an accident with Verstappen. Who knows? But in the end, got second, which is not the end of the world for Norris. It's still a good result, considering he's only 10 points behind, but Lando really did need to win this Spanish Grand Prix. But there is still plenty of races coming up in the calendar. Next Grand Prix is Montreal, and I think McLaren will be definitely the favourites at that Grand Prix. And yeah, both McLarens should be super quick. In terms of who needs to win the Canadian Grand Prix more, I'd say probably Lando Norris, purely because he's only 10 points behind and must keep the championship gap close through the season if he wants to grab the championship at the very, very end. Because if Piastri wins again in Montreal and that gap goes up to at least 17 points, Piastri might start to run away with things on the driver's side. But, McLaren, they should be the favourites in Montreal. The only issue is obviously their straight line speed is not the best, and that is something that Red Bull and Ferrari could possibly exploit in Montreal. But McLaren, through the corners, there is no better team right now. That is abundantly clear to see. Next up, we'll go on to the Ferrari team, who ended up on the podium, a result that really, you'd have to say they deserve to get. Leclerc, obviously, in qualifying, did not do a second run, when if he did, he probably would have ended up third on the grid. Maybe even on the front row if he really had a super final lap. And Ferrari, I think, always had a good chance of a podium finish, but because Leclerc didn't do that second run in Q3 and saved an extra set of medium tyres, that was always going to make things a bit more difficult for him in the race. But at the start of the race, Ferrari had a brilliant start. They were 5th and 7th on the grid. By the end of lap 1, they were 4th and 5th. And then for a couple laps, were close to Norris, who was in 3rd. And then suddenly, Lewis Hamilton dropped off a cliff in terms of his pace. And I must criticise Ferrari heavily, as I've seen many Ferrari fans do. What on earth were they doing for those few laps where Leclerc was clearly being held up by Hamilton? Leclerc was cost about 5 seconds, maybe 6 seconds you could say, being held up by Hamilton there. How long of a tea break, as I said on my race watch along, how long of a tea break was it to discuss and eventually decide what should happen in terms of who should be ahead of who? It was obvious after about a lap at most of Leclerc being right behind Hamilton that Leclerc needed to be let through. But no, Ferrari took way too long to make that decision, and they are very fortunate that the safety car came out, because if it didn't, that would have been really what cost Leclerc at least an opportunity before that safety car to finish on the podium. But thankfully, safety car came out. Max Verstappen only was able to go onto the hard tyres because that's all he had left. Leclerc went on to the soft compound, and then Leclerc was able immediately to get into the lead because obviously Max had his little incident at the final corner where he nearly spun the car in a very violent snap of oversteer that Verstappen had. They did have some contact down the pit straight. No further action, the stewards decided on that one, thankfully for Leclerc. But yeah, Leclerc ended up then getting on the podium, and I think deserved it, because his pace, if you go and look at his pace at times during the race, compared to Verstappen, and even compared at times to Lando Norris, he was doing some good lap times when he was eventually let through by Hamilton. They just waited too long to make that decision, and again, it cost him a few seconds that were just completely unnecessary to cost Leclerc there. But thankfully for Ferrari, they got away with it because the safety car came out. In regards to Lewis Hamilton, shockingly poor race from him. Had a decent qualifying. Fifth was a decent result from him. He put himself in a decent position for maybe a podium in the race. I think even my co-commentator Niblo on the race watch along, I think before the race, even predicted Hamilton to finish third, and there was a few people that thought Lewis Hamilton had a decent chance at podium, but he was so incredibly slow in that race, to the point where, despite not having any damage, I don't think, after the safety car came in, he was overtaken by Nico Hülkenberg in a Sauber, and was lucky not to be overtaken by Isaac Hadjar in the Racing Bulls car. Very embarrassing race for Lewis, and he is just continuing to show, and I don't care if people are offended by this, it's the truth, it's the reality that Lewis Hamilton fans especially need to accept. Lewis Hamilton is washed. He is past his best. He is not the Lewis Hamilton anymore, and with every race I see, he is getting closer to what we saw with Michael Schumacher when he came back to Formula 1 with Mercedes. Where, yeah, odd race, yeah, he can have a good race and beat Leclerc, but most of the time is comfortably slower than Leclerc and is in the middle of nowhere a lot of the time. That's what Lewis Hamilton is now. And Lewis Hamilton fans especially, if you're going to criticise me, fair enough, but you need to accept reality. Lewis Hamilton is past his best. That is what the Spanish Grand Prix once again showed us, as many other Grand Prix this season have also shown us in 2025. Anyway, let's go on to... actually, before I go on to Red Bull, just want to quickly say with Ferrari, in Montreal, should be decent in terms of their competitiveness. I know last year they were absolutely terrible, but I think that was just a very rare instance of just not hooking up to the track at all with their car. I think this time around in Montreal, I think they'll be fine. I don't think they're going to be on the podium necessarily, but I think they'll be competitive enough to be in the mix for maybe a top 3, top 4. So yeah, I think Ferrari will be a lot better, no doubt, than they were last year in Canada. But if Leclerc can get on the podium yet again, then that would be absolutely brilliant for Ferrari, who definitely, in these last couple races, have turned their form around. Still, though, they do need quite a bit of improvement if they are going to start winning races in 2025, because McLaren are way too good right now. Yeah, let's go on to Red Bull, and namely Max Verstappen. Now, at the start of the race, Verstappen got past Norris, was a brilliant move, and then Lando, very quickly after a few laps, overtook Max, and Max made the right decision not fighting Lando, because he would have wasted so much time fighting Lando for for second place. The McLaren was way too quick, and Max rightly accepted that. Now, I thought Max did a great job on his 3-stop strategy before the safety car came out. Was very quick, got the most out of the tyres that he did, in the stints that he did. And you can't really sit there and say that he didn't make that 3-stop work, at least for securing the podium. He absolutely did. And before the safety car came out, he was, 3 or 4 seconds behind Norris, which was a lot closer than really that car deserved to be to the McLarens. And then the safety car came out. And unfortunately for Max, they only had one new set of hard compound tyres left for him. So he had to go onto that compound. And yeah, that is what cost him the podium, because really, the moment he had at the final corner when the restart happened would have been the lack of grip from that tyre. And he did very well to save the car. Leclerc got the move done on him. And then George Russell threw his car down the inside of Verstappen at turn 1 and made contact with Verstappen, and Verstappen ended up then going off the track and rejoining ahead, which was, there was no problem with that. Now, in regards to the incident, we all know the incident I'm on about. I am going to save my opinion on it, because I will be making a video on the Verstappen-Russell incident at the Spanish Grand Prix. That video should be out either this Friday or next Monday. One of the 2 days. I will say hopefully this Friday, but again, if not, then next Monday. But one thing I will say is the message to Verstappen to for him to let Russell through was incorrect, because as the stewards noted in their official document where they, explain why they gave Max a 10-second penalty, they did actually say it was unnecessary for Red Bull to let Russell through because they had already decided, I think, no further action in regards to that incident. So Red Bull, they started what was a chain reaction, really. But again, in terms of the actual incident, I'm going to save my thoughts on that for that video. But Verstappen did what he did, got a 10-second penalty, and ended up finishing in P10. A disaster for his championship. Even though, yes, he really needed to win this Grand Prix, third would have still been something to come away with from this race. But the bad luck of only having hard tyres left for that final few laps after the safety car, and then the incident, what happened, has absolutely destroyed his weekend and really hurt his championship bid, because there is 5 races to go until the summer break, and those races are in Montreal, Red Bull Ring, Silverstone, Spa and Hungary. If Max is going to win the championship, he needs to win at least 2 of those 5 races. Not sure what 2 of those 5 races would be most likely for him to win. Maybe you could say the Red Bull Ring, purely because Max is so good around that circuit. And then maybe Spa as well, because we know how amazing he is at Spa. So maybe, Austria and Spa would be the 2 tracks. If he wins at, those 2 tracks, and then it's, say, Montreal, Silverstone and Hungary ends up at worst third, then that keeps him absolutely in the championship hunt. But if he does not win another race between now and the summer break, then by the time the summer break comes, I think he'll be out of the championship running, because he'll be too far behind at that point. Probably, 70 to 80 points behind. And he will need to produce an absolutely amazing second half of the season after the summer break to win the championship, if that is the case. So it is now really time for Max, and most importantly Red Bull, to get their heads down and really work hard in these next few weeks. They need definitely a new upgrade, because McLaren are still just way too quick. And Red Bull, if they don't get any closer to McLaren, it's going to be very hard for Max Verstappen, certainly, to win races, especially the races required to be world champion. So, yeah, Verstappen is entering a very critical part of the season if he's going to save his championship, which normally is where you get to see Max at his best, when he absolutely has to win. So I cannot wait to see what Max does in these next few races. But yeah, it is now, the championship, especially on the driver's side, is now at a critical point for Verstappen. No doubt about that. In Montreal, I can see Verstappen taking on the McLarens because he is very quick out at the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve circuit in Montreal. He's very quick there. We know that. He's won the last 3 Canadian Grand Prix, I think. So we know what he can do, but will McLaren just prove to be too quick yet again? We'll see. Obviously, we don't know what the weather's going to be like. Anything really could happen in Canada. We've seen that so many times over the last 20 or 30 years. So, yeah, Verstappen, we'll see what he can do in Canada. I think Red Bull will be competitive enough to be fighting in the top 3, but whether they can actually properly fight for the win, we'll have to see. I think a lot of that does come down to Max Verstappen himself. For Yuki Tsunoda ended up, was it 13th, 14th, something like that, I think, in the end. 13th it was. Just not good enough from Tsunoda this weekend. Yeah, the car is tricky to drive, and he doesn't have the same spec, I think, as Verstappen, but still, Tsunoda, I think, could have done a bit better this weekend. But that's unfortunately the way it is. And Red Bull in a very tricky situation. And we'll finish up with Mercedes-Benz, who had I wouldn't say a disappointing weekend, just I guess mediocre is what I would call it. George Russell in qualifying, I thought, did a good job doing the same time as Verstappen in 4th. I don't think Russell really could have done any better. He did the best he could, got I think only a 10th away from Norris in 2nd, so yeah, you can't really complain too much. And in terms of the race, the start he had wasn't great. One thing I will criticise him on is into turn 4, he did put his car out of position, which really did help Leclerc overtake him into turn 5, I think it was. So that wasn't great from Russell. But other than that, his pace in the race was fine. In regards to the incident with Verstappen, all I'll say is his move at turn 1 on the restart was very ambitious. But yeah, Verstappen, I think, had every right to go off the track and keep his position. But yeah, 4th, I think, honestly, is probably a good result for Russell, considering Mercedes were the slowest of the front 4 teams. And Mercedes never looked likely to finish anywhere near the podium. So, yeah, 4th place is a good result for Russell. For Antonelli, a 3rd race in a row where he doesn't score a point. Obviously, at Imola, he was going to score points, but then he had an issue with his car. Same here in Spain. Something clearly let go at the back in his engine, most likely, and he went off into the gravel. Antonelli having a very difficult time as of late. One thing I will say, though, with Antonelli is, even though, he had the DNF, and that's the reason he ended up, obviously retiring when he was going to score some points, I still don't think he is doing well enough at the moment. I thought in Spain he was just a bit too slow compared to, especially to his teammate. And, when you consider how slow Lewis Hamilton was in the race, I think Antonelli really should have been taking advantage of that. But he did not. He was in a very lonely 7th place, absolutely miles off the pace of his teammate. If he had not retired from the race, he probably would have ended up a pit stop behind his teammate, which is, not good enough, I'm afraid. So, even though, he had the DNF, that's unlucky, I still think he is not doing well enough at the moment, and I think definitely needs to step up his his pace. I know it's his debut season, but you know, at these racetracks, especially like the Circuit de Catalunya, you can't say, oh, well, he's never driven it before. He has. I think more than once. So he has experience. He's just not showing enough pace at the moment, as far as I'm concerned. In regards to the Canadian Grand Prix, I think Mercedes will be decent, but whether they'll be actually like fighting for the podium or anything, I don't really know, to be honest. But one thing I would like to see is Antonelli properly, you know, I wouldn't say in there with Russell, but if Russell's going to be ahead, Antonelli really should not be any more than a few seconds behind. Really, he's got to get closer to George Russell on lap time, because he's being really comfortably beaten at the moment on pure pace by his teammate. So yeah, Antonelli has to step it up, no doubt about that. But yeah, that is your Spanish Grand Prix. Shout out, obviously, to Hulkenberg again. Amazing drive. Isaac Hadjar up to 9th in the championship. Another load of points. Really loving this guy this season. I think he's been so good. One of the top 10 drivers of the season so far. No doubt about it. And yeah, congrats to Gasly and Alonso for getting points. And especially Alonso finally getting off the mark in 2025. But yeah, that's what happened in the Spanish Grand Prix, guys. Just to let you guys know before I head off, again, either this Friday or next Monday, I will be uploading a video reviewing the incident between Max Verstappen and George Russell and giving my view on what should have happened with Verstappen in regards to the actual incident itself. So make sure to check out that video. Again, it will be either uploaded this Friday or next Monday. And then the next Grand Prix in Canada, I will be doing both a qualifying and race watch along for that Grand Prix. In terms of the timings of the streams, for qualifying, I will be live at 7:30 p.m. UK time on the Saturday to obviously build up to qualifying for an hour and a half and then cover the session itself. And then I will be live at 5 p.m. UK time on Sunday, 2 hours before lights out at 7 p.m. for the Canadian Grand Prix. Niblo might be joining me for the race watch along. We'll have to see. It is very difficult timing-wise for him in Australia, so if he doesn't come on then, yeah, that's completely understandable. But yeah, that is the plan content-wise between now and the end of the Canadian Grand Prix. Then, of course, as usual, the day after the Canadian Grand Prix, there will be a video reviewing the events of the weekend. So, yeah, that is the plan of content for the next 2 weeks. Hope you guys can come along and consume that content. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to the channel and smash the like button as well. It does help the channel, and the algorithm helps also show me that you guys enjoy the content. And until my video covering the Verstappen-Russell incident, and until the next Grand Prix, the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal, usually one of the most exciting Grand Prix on the calendar. Until then, guys, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.